Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I am your host for tonight, Jeremiah J. Preisser, and my co-host, our West Virginia star host, is John Einrienhofer. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Jeremiah. Great to be here tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad you're on. We've known each other for years now. You're one of the few people I respect on the boxing boards, and I'm happy to have you on.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I appreciate it. Really looking forward to tonight getting a chance to do this with you, and gotten to work with Mike Goodpaster a little bit as well, and great to be here, and glad you guys have me here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first fight we're going to talk about from last weekend is Terry Flanagan versus Peter Petrov. I saw it as a fairly evenly matched lightweight contest between two good fighters, two potential top 10 guys. Petrov, I think, a little bit on the outside, but it was a close fight. I thought Petrov did pretty well. Flanagan certainly didn't dominate. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree, Jeremiah. I had Flanagan in my I still like to go very old school and rate things by 8 divisions, as we have the ratings up on the gruelingtruth.net. I had Flanagan in my top 5, and I agree with your categorization of Petrov. To me, he was fringe, just about top 10, not quite in there. If you were ranking 17 weight classes, he'd just probably be into the lightweight top 10. I thought the fight was pretty even. I'm not saying Flanagan didn't win the fight, but I frankly thought he looked terrible. I thought it was a disappointing performance by him, with possible big fights being discussed. Boxing's undergoing a boom in the UK. You would think there really were some opportunities there. Of course, he's undefeated, but I hate to go too far in one performance, but in his case, where fighters are not really facing legit top 10 opposition much, if at all, and then he's fighting Petrov, which is just about legit top 10. He just didn't show me much at all. He didn't show punching power. He didn't land much. I could see him getting the decision. I thought the scores were outrageous, though. I thought that the fight was much, much closer than the judges had it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm not sure what they were watching there. I mean, honestly, I thought Flanagan did fairly well in the beginning when he was utilizing his speed. You know, he was darting in and out. His jab was fairly sharp, but Petrov seemed to time it over a bit. Was using a nice right hand. But I agree. The thing about Flanagan, however, is he holds that WBO belt, and as we both know, Top Rank loves that belt. He loves the organization. So my guess is he either gets Felix Verdejo next or Vasyl Lomachenko. What do you think?
I think both are a possibility. I agree with you. The WBO is just a subsidiary of Top Rank at this point, as far as I'm concerned. So whatever HBO, the WBO, and Bob Arum want to work out, it's going to work out. So that depends what they want, and the WBO will be there. Of course, they were investing in Verdejo, and Verdejo has been spotty, but they have the investment in him, so I think that's a very reasonable possibility. Lomachenko, the way Flanagan looked and the way Lomachenko looked, you wouldn't think Lomachenko would have much problem. The only thing that makes me wonder if they would want to go that route, though, is the height differential. While it didn't look like Flanagan could be competitive with Lomachenko, Lomachenko's 5'6", Flanagan very tall for a lightweight. Even though they're discussing that fight, would Arum and HBO want that to be the spot? I just don't know if they're serious about that or not.
Yeah, it's hard to say. My guess is that Verdejo will likely get the shot, depending on what Lomachenko wants. He seems to have a lot of pull around there. But with Verdejo and Flanagan, I think that's a fairly even contest, though I'd probably favor Verdejo even at this point. But we'll see how that plays out, and we'll keep an eye on it. So next we're going to move to the main event in Manchester, United Kingdom. It was the Battle of the Liams. Liam Williams versus Liam Smith for some interim trinket nobody really cares about. What did you think about the fight?
I was pleasantly surprised by Liam Williams until the fight ended. I thought, and it was a bizarre ending, I thought he was dominating the fight. He was showing hand speed, good snap in his punches. I thought Liam Smith looked awful. He was coming on a bit. Williams was getting tired. Williams did admit after the fight he got a bit tired. I don't know if Williams was trying to be humble after the fight or he's got a confidence problem because I know I wasn't in the ring and he's in his own body, but it looked to me like a fight he was dominating. Maybe he was slightly tired. The cut appeared to come from a headbutt, and then you had the bizarre situation where you would have thought Williams was ahead on the scorecards. They weren't revealed at that point, and then Williams' corner is choosing to stop the fight, not the doctor, so Smith is getting a TKO win. Just a bizarre, unsatisfying ending that I thought Williams did perform well, and apparently he had a legitimately bad cut, but didn't say too much for me for Liam Smith, in my opinion. I know he's got his fans who see it differently, but I thought Williams was dominating. The ending was utterly bizarre. May sound like a cop-out, but you just say plain old, just wasn't just the way it finished for Liam Williams. But, Smith gets a controversial win, to say the least there.
Yeah, I thought Liam Williams, I thought his jab was on in the early going, and I think Liam Smith, he just puts the earmuffs on, and he comes at you, and he doesn't present a lot of head movement. So I thought that played into Williams. I thought that played right into Liam Williams' hands. I mean, he landed some nice uppercuts, went to the body pretty well, and I don't think that looks good on Canelo Alvarez. I mean, of course, Liam Smith didn't really beat anybody to get the WBO title in the first place, but to me, it looks like they're going to have a rematch. Of course, I will favor Liam Williams in that fight again. I just think he has more upside. You think it'll play out that way too?
Yeah, I agree. I think Liam Williams has more upside. My only concern was I don't like to put the mental game matters, but I don't like to overinvest in the mental game. But I just thought Liam Williams should have sounded more confident in the post-fight interviews. As long as he gets the necessary confidence, gets himself back in good shape, I would think he wins the rematch. And I have been a believer in Canelo Alvarez, but I did think the same thing watching the fight, that when we looked at the way that it was playing out for Liam Smith against Liam Williams, it showed you Canelo Alvarez had fought some tough opposition, but now he's coming off a sequence of Liam Smith, Amir Khan. He's got Chavez coming up, who's not what he was, 4.5, 5 years ago. Forget the weight part. And I then liken him a bit to Deontay Wilder, who I also like, but a lot of people like to make him a punching bag also. But I agree the criticism of both men in this sense, that I think that some of the criticism initially was unjust, but now they are going so long without fighting truly top quality opposition that they may be sabotaging themselves.
I agree. So we'll move on to the big fight, which a lot of people tuned into. Apparently, Lomachenko and Sosa at its peak did about close to 850,000, but we'll start on the undercard, of course. And the fight that I watched first was Aegis Kovalevskis, a Lithuanian fighter, former Olympian. He fought Ramses Agaton, and of course this was on the untelevised portion of the fight. And I just want to mention this because Aegis Kovalevskis has agreed to come on the show next week, and I'm very excited about that because he's one of the welterweight prospects that I like the most, and it's a hot division. So if you watch the fight, Agaton was a southpaw. Kovalevskis, of course, an orthodox fighter, power puncher, fights out of Robert Garcia's gym. Kovalevskis took a few rounds to kind of get his timing down from the southpaw, but once he found his range with the right hand, he was devastating. Ended the fight with a very nice right hand. Had him hurt the round before, actually, and then just stayed patient and kind of finished the job. So if if any of our viewers or listeners, John as well, the fight is available on YouTube. You can go ahead and check it out. Not a long fight. But after that, of course, there were a few other prospects. But then to the televised portion was Alexander Usyk versus Michael Hunter. Usyk, of course, an Olympian, very good amateur fighter. Michael Hunter was a good amateur fighter for the Americans. I believe he was eliminated in the first round, however, so he didn't make it too far. What was your impression of Usyk fighting Michael Hunter? To be honest with you, I wasn't that impressed, but I am interested in your take.
For me, it was the second disappointing performance in a row for Usyk. I was high on him like everybody else. I did not like his previous fight. I did not like his performance against Hunter either. Of course, he clearly won the fight. You know, we are nitpicking in the sense that he was never close to losing the fight, but he was getting hit, and for a guy who at least came into the fight with a high KO percentage, he just looked like a slapper. That concerned me when you think about him moving up to heavyweight. I was looking forward to seeing him move up to heavyweight, and I don't want to count him out. I'd still like to see him try it, but last two performances, not good to me. I just have not seen it in the last two fights. I haven't seen what I wanted to see. The boxing hasn't really been that brilliant for how highly touted he is, and he seems to be more of a slapper with his punches. And then probably most concerning for him with what kind of style he has is he was taking shots against Hunter. And you and I had off the air discussed Hunter previously, and we weren't that impressed with some of his previous pro performances. I thought, considering who he was in with, he showed some good things Saturday night, but then he really faded. I just didn't think it was a plus for Usyk.
Yeah, I agree. With Hunter, I think he came in with a good game plan. You know, he wasn't putting a lot of pop behind his shots. It didn't look like he was trying to stop Usyk. He was just kind of touching him, but it was working. And that was the thing that surprised me most, is that Usyk, from what I've seen against lesser opposition, he's displayed, you know, really good boxing ability. He's displayed good lateral movement. He's been able to avoid a lot of shots. But with Hunter, he was just getting tagged constantly, so the one thing that I do like was he just kind of threw it all out the window and he just went and got Hunter. You know what I mean? He was like, okay, this strategy isn't working. He adjusted, and he just kept coming forward to Hunter and banged him out, almost got him out of there. I mean, the 12th round was close. I thought maybe they were going to stop it, but, you know, he made it to the finish line. But I agree. I just wasn't overly impressed with Usyk. He, like you said, he was slapping with his punches, especially the hooks. I mean, the left hand isn't so bad, but the right hook is what particularly concerned me.
Yeah, I think I've been weighing going into this fight. I like Gassiev a lot. The only reason I was maybe giving Usyk a slight edge over him theoretically, of course, they're with different promotional operations as well, but theoretically, if they were to fight, was that Usyk had the extensive amateur background. Gassiev, unlike most of the Eastern Europeans, does not have much of an amateur background, even though he looks spectacular in the pros. But I would make Gassiev a favorite now after what I've seen over Usyk's last two fights, because Gassiev can bring power and pressure. Before these last couple of fights, you thought Usyk might outbox him and use that experience, but Gassiev might be able to bring a little too much for him now. What also concerns me as a fan with what we saw with Usyk's last two fights is that I don't have much faith in what top-ranking Bob Arum want to deliver, and I personally, as a fan, am not looking forward to a lengthy run of fighting mediocre cruiserweight opposition with that style. I would like to see him take his hand at heavyweight, but now they might not have the confidence in him doing that. And if HBO wants me to give me a lot of that against mediocre cruiserweight opposition, count me out as a fan.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I like Usyk, and, you know, I think he's a good fighter. And, of course, like a lot of these Eastern Europeans, he had a long amateur background. So even if, you know, he's going to hit a wall soon. I mean, him and a lot of these other guys, I mean, they've already seen the 3.0 tick on their biological odometer, so I don't think there's a lot of mileage left. But we'll see how they handle Usyk. I'm hoping that they do something big with him. But anyways, he got the win. We'll expect more next time. Anyways, moving on, and I think what was largely deemed as the closest to a 50-50 fight on the card. And I know you and I were both looking forward to this. Personally, I've seen Gonzalez fight. I saw him against Pascal on the Kovalev-Mohammadi undercard. Like a lot of people, I thought he beat Pascal. He also went tooth and nail with Shabransky, who's a good fighter as well. Again, a lot of us thought that this would be a close fight, Alexander Gvozdyk versus Gonzalez, but Gvozdyk put on a career performance. How did you like it?
I loved it. I loved what Gvozdyk did. I thought the performance was spectacular. I also thought Gonzalez clearly beat Pascal. I thought his fight with Shabransky was underrated in terms of his performance and action. I thought Shabransky did win the fight, but that was one heck of a brawl, and it was a majority decision. Gonzalez is a tough guy who really comes to fight determined, no nonsense, and Gvozdyk just obliterated him. The accuracy of his shots. One thing I look for in an up-and-coming fighter is I just call it generally firepower, where it's part the punching power and part the accuracy. And for me, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I mean, just every shot was accurate with good power. And we all like to criticize him at times, but I thought Jim Lampley made a good point in the post-fight when he pointed out that he has elected to live in Los Angeles full-time, unlike the other Ukrainians, and you could see in the post-fight interview that his English is good. He's in the United States full-time. Seems to me like a guy that should really be pushed even farther by Top Rank and Arum. I'm not saying that he's past Lomachenko, but on the other hand, with the excitement that's available in the light heavyweight division, you'd like to see him really getting pushed. But I think that this is the problem we run into with top-ranked fighters, is that if you look at the fighters that Top Rank actually has signed, their total number is very low. And when they try to stay in-house, there's just nobody for these guys to fight. Theoretically there should be, but because of they're keeping things basically in-house, the available opponents are very limited, and that concerns me, because I would like to see him against top opposition right off. He definitely, to me, I thought I'd see enough. I mean, remember, he stopped Chilemba. He was the first guy to stop Chilemba recently. Probably didn't get enough credit for that. He should be really a threat to anybody at this point. I don't think it's getting too carried away to say it. No,
I agree with that. I mean, Gvozdyk, I followed this guy since his introduction. I mean, and I've really liked what I've seen from him. He had a little scare against Tommy Karpency in which he was knocked down. So my only question mark is his chin. I don't think it's great, but in terms of boxing ability, I don't think there aren't a lot of guys on his level at 175. Of course, Ward, Kovalev, they're up there certainly. But his foot movement was really nice. His sense of timing and distance was excellent. His combination punching was fantastic. And I liked how he finished the job. When he had a guy hurt, he went in there and got it. And I'm hoping, of course, it's hard to say who we're going to get anymore. I'd like to see him against Adonis Stevenson. I think, of course, I don't think that fight's going to be made. I just think, with Kovalev and Ward having their rematch and Gvozdyk open, Stevenson fighting Von Farah in a rematch, I don't know who's asking for that. But that's who I'd like to see him get, but we'll see.
You try to think, this is what worries me about the top-ranked fighters. You try to think who Gvozdyk could even fight next. Again, with the politics of boxing, who they could actually get for him, it would probably have to be somebody tied in with another promoter who does business with HBO, which then we're talking, of course, these would be excellent fights. Our best hope would have to be Ward, Kovalev. You've got Shabransky is tied in with HBO through Golden Boy, but, after seeing Shabransky against Barrera, Gvozdyk is just too accurate for Shabransky. That's a bad matchup for Shabransky. So, those would be I would think they would be the most realistic options based on the TV and promotional ties.
Right, and I think
Ward and Kovalev have got to get their rematch in first, but then after that, they're going to have to fight somebody. So that's would be my best hope.
Right. And, something we've talked about often is, Gvozdyk is another really good addition to 175. The class is loaded. We've been talking about this for a while now, and it seems like people are just kind of starting to pick up on it, but it's an excellent division.
Yeah, it's my favorite division right now. I do think it's the best division in boxing. I think it has the potential for the most excitement. I did think Jim Lampley made another good point a couple of years ago on an HBO telecast when he talked about the golden age of the light heavyweights. A lot of us like to talk about, and it's definitely true, which had the late 70s, early 80s, with guys like Mustafa Muhammad, Saad Muhammad, Michael Spinks, etc. As great as those guys were, they were weighing in on the day of the fight. These guys now not weighing in on the day of the fight. Forget the cruiserweight division. If you go back to the traditional 8 divisions, these guys are coming in as heavyweights now. So, they're throwing punches like light heavyweights in the past, but now you're getting more one-punch type power like heavyweights, and it combines really for a lot of excitement. And I forgot HBO does have Sullivan Barrera also. Maybe he didn't want to fight Beterbiev. Maybe they can make the match with Gvozdyk, so that would be another good fight. That's a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent alternative. And anyways, we'll turn our attention to the main event of that card. And, of course, it was Vasyl Lomachenko, Mr. High Tech versus former pizza maker Jason Sosa. My quick 2 cents is Lomachenko put on a fantastic performance, but what did we expect? I believe we all expected that.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. No criticism of Lomachenko, just in the sense that performed well. I don't have any criticism of his performance. I'm not saying Lomachenko didn't dominate the fight. He certainly did. He certainly won every round. But I don't think Jason Sosa maybe performed as bad as some people seem to be implying. I thought, he was just taking too many shots at the end, and his corner stopped it. No doubt that the last round he was in before they stopped it, he just stopped firing anything back. But I thought he landed a couple of shots on Lomachenko here and there. Again, no criticism of Lomachenko's performance whatsoever, just saying that I don't think Sosa was all that bad in there as some people have made out. I like to see Sosa again. I think he's a tough guy who comes to fight. I thought Lomachenko seemed to give him that respect after the fight. And again, sure, would I like to see Lomachenko fight some other people instead of Jason Sosa? Sure, I'm like everybody else, but I thought some people might have been getting a little bit too down on Sosa there. I think he's a guy that at the very least, in terms of action, we'd like to see him come back against some people. Certainly, if he came back and fought a Gervonta Davis, that would be an interesting fight. People like that. If he fought Edgar Cherry, somebody like that. Yeah, these. I think I'd like to see him more than some others in these types of fights.
Yeah, and I think at 130, I think if Lomachenko decides to move up to 135 soon, or he focuses attention on Orlando Salido, I think the division's fairly wide open because Sosa I think can hang and make good fights with Burchelt. Maybe a beat-up Roman Martinez, Takashi Miura, maybe Orlando Salido if Lomachenko decides to move up. So I think there are a lot of options for him, and I think winnable fights.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I see it. He's a guy I still want to see around some more. I don't think people should get down on him or count him out. And for Lomachenko, I think lightweight. He fought lightweight in the amateurs. It's the traditional division, and in this case, it makes more sense for what fights are available. So, again, I guess he's our favorite person or promoter to get on tonight, but not that they all can't be criticized for some things. But, Bob Arum, stop with the 130-pound thing. Get this guy up to lightweight and start trying to at least establish or beat the drum for some possible good fights that are available in that division. As, Linares is coming off a very good performance. Mikey Garcia is there now. Of course, there's, again, cross-promotional issues, TV things, but we'd at least like to see them try to work something out there.
Right, yeah. I mean, Aram's they got to stop with the WBO stuff. I mean, I'm a big fan of Lomachenko. He's supremely skilled. I mean, he's one of the best young fighters he's one of the best fighters I've seen in quite a while. But it's this WBO stuff that really gets me. I mean, he gets a shot against Salido, loses. Then he gets Gary Russell, beats him up real nicely. But then after that, he's stuck with guys like Kosha, or I can't remember his name. What is it? The Thai fighter. It's just, I like seeing Lomachenko against top-notch opposition already, but it's this WBO thing that really gets me, and the media, how they're like, oh my, he's a two-time world champion already. Look, I like Lomachenko, but he's not a two-division world champion. That's all just modern day bullcrap. Get him against, and I understand with 126, part of it was politics, right? I mean, he did get Gary Russell Jr., but did he get Frampton? Did he get Santa Cruz? Did he get any of these guys? I mean, did Rigondeaux come up? So part of it isn't his fault, so I don't want to place all the blame on him, but it's still this two-time division thing and these bloated statistics of modern-day fighters that get me.
Yeah, that's why I often, any chance I get, anything I write, speak, I plead, and anybody listening to us here on this cast, I plead with the fans to ignore this alphabet WBO stuff, the other organizations. This is not the way you should be measuring things in boxing. They're just trying to fool you. The WBO has just become a subsidiary of HBO and Bob Arum. It's just simply almost in existence for situations like Saturday night where they want to have Lomachenko fight a Jason Sosa and tell you it's supposed to mean something. When, again, as much as I like Jason Sosa, if there were 8 divisions, he wouldn't be ranked, and Lomachenko, as good of a fighter as he is, at this point wouldn't hold a world title. So you would basically be seeing Vasyl Lomachenko working his way up against against a guy that's not quite in the rankings, and that would be fine. But the point is, it wouldn't be worthy of the hype they're giving it, or headlining an HBO card. And that's people are paying for HBO. HBO's premium cable. That's another thing that I think some fans do get, but some don't. You are paying for this. It's HBO. This is something most people that watch boxing have HBO just for the boxing. And so that's your $15 a month or whatever these are the fights you're paying for.
Right. Yep. I absolutely agree. And I hope Lomachenko gets the winner of Garcia Linares. I believe that's the way it's going to go. We had Mikey Garcia on last week. He said that paraphrasing here, Lomachenko hasn't earned it. Linares has the better resume at 135. I agree with all that. Well, I'm not saying Lomachenko hasn't earned it. I think he's a credible opponent. I think we all know that. But I'd like to see Garcia versus Linares, whoever wins that fight. Lomachenko can go up and beat Terry Flanagan. He can go up and beat Flanagan if he wants, and then the two winners fight each other, and then we have, a Laniel lightweight champion. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what we're all hoping for. Anyways, we're going to move on to this coming week's fights, which aren't quite as exciting as last week's fights, but we have a couple of guys from, well, I don't want to say Eastern Europeans because I don't think Dmitry Bivol is. He is from Russia. However, I believe he's from Kyrgyzstan. So
that's correct.
Yeah, so I'm not going to label him an Eastern European, but we've got 2 Russians in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Again, it's supposed to be shown on the Showtime card. So what do you think of Bivol? What do you think of Clarkson? Who do you think takes it?
I like that fight. Bivol's a significant favorite, but I've liked Clarkson. He's on a winning streak. He stopped Jerry Odom over a while back on a Showbox card in an excellent performance. He's bringing some power, and he's on a winning streak. I like this fight a lot. I can't go against Bivol at this point, but I would use the old phrase that Clarkson's certainly a live underdog here. Personally, you can call us boxing geeks or say what you will, but it's the fight I'm looking forward to most this weekend. I think I like the light heavyweight division. I think it's the best division in boxing right now, and we've got even more interesting fighters like this who aren't even top 10 yet but can make good fights. And Showtime has done well with this ShowBox series, and I'm looking forward to this fight. I would think Bivol takes it, but this is a kind of matchup you like where there's a live underdog in there who's bringing some pop, and these light heavyweights are even bigger than the past, and they're bringing even more power. And so I think, that it's a type of fight where something interesting could happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I like what Clarkson has done since his loss to Jesse Hart. I've seen that one as well. It's been a bit, to be honest with you. But, I mean, he had a nice little win over Cedric Agnew. The guy Kovalev beat up. Odom was the fight, like you, I was most impressed with. My only problem with Clarkson is he does have power and he does have pretty good skill. But like we talked about Liam Smith, sometimes he puts the earmuffs on, so he won't always give you a lot of head movement. And if you don't do that against a guy like Dmitry Bivol, who, like a lot of these Eastern Europeans or guys from former USSR nations, he's just technically superb. He's got a fantastic right hand, understands distance and timing well. And again, he can punch. I mean, his hand speed is also quite good. For anybody who's seen this guy, you can go check his stuff out, of course, on YouTube, but he was in the WSB like a lot of these guys. I just think Clarkson, he's a guy who's going to present challenges, but I think Bivol's style kind of plays, I like the way it matches up against Clarkson. I think, with a strong right hand that he's got, and again, Clarkson's kind of stand-up defense from time to time, I think Bivol's going to get the stoppage here, but it's a good fight.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be, despite Clarkson's record, we know he's a better fighter than his record indicates. It'll be by far Bivol's biggest test so far, and that's what you want. And ShowBox bills themselves as providing those kinds of tests, and they have delivered. We talk about all the overhype you get with alphabet organizations and the TV networks going along with it. The ShowBox series is basically delivered. So this is another one of those types of ShowBox fights. And really, they've actually provided some Fight of the Year candidates that have been under the radar screen even just over the last couple of years. So let's hope we get one of those types of explosions.
Yeah, I'm hoping for that too. And speaking of deceptive records, we have Sullivan Barrera versus Paul Parker. And Paul Parker, of course, is the one I'm talking about with a deceptive record. This is another fight in the light heavyweight division. It seems like the theme for tonight. Again, it's a great division. Just go on BoxRec and look at the depth. I mean, I wrote an article on Dmitry Bivol, and I point out the depth in this division. I mean, you have all sorts of different stylistic differences, young people, new people, all sorts of stuff. But this fight I'm also looking forward to. What do you think about it, John?
Not considering that they had to find Paul Parker. Promoters, of course, always come up with hyperbole, but in this case, I actually tend to believe it because Sullivan Barrera was the opponent. Kathy Duva said she looked for 50 guys and came up with Paul Parker. You and I have actually discussed Paul Parker within the last couple of years as being one of these kind of under the radar screen guys that if he got some training and was able to get fights and be active, he might be a factor. Now that hasn't really come to pass. He's only had 9 fights, but he's a very tall guy who has punching power in his right hand, and that's the makeup that can be dangerous to anybody. One of those tall, lanky type punchers, and his skill set is not bad either. So I could think of worse. If you want to call him a journeyman, even though he's only had 9 fights, he could probably still fit into that, or the old term of a club fighter type. But he's got some skills. He truly is a guy that if he got top-notch training and got noticed before fights, he looks like a guy that might be able to make some noise. So I could think of worse guys to be in this situation at the last moment or with later notice. He's had some notice. But Barrera looked extremely good against Shabransky. But, of course, now Parker almost knocked out Shabransky in the first round. He had him just about out of there. And Shabransky was able to rally, and Parker just gasped, and Shabransky stopped him in the next round. But, Shabransky undefeated at the time and one of the top prospects in boxing, and Parker was able to do that to him. You and I can't recall the opponent, but then we did see Parker against somebody else that he decisioned. I believe that might have been on a PBC FS1 card, and I can't recall the opponent. So he's not a bad fighter for this situation. He's a significant underdog, but with the power these two guys will bring into the ring, Sullivan, Barrera, and Parker, not the worst matchup in the world.
Yeah, I agree, and I like what I've seen with Sullivan Barrera thus far. I mean, he was clearly outboxed by Ward, but he's shown himself to be worthy afterwards. But I'm hoping after this he moves on to bigger and better things. There are all sorts of fights out there for him, all sorts of fights out there to be made in the light heavyweight division. So we'll see where he goes from here. And of course, the last fight we're going to talk about for this upcoming weekend is Ricky Burns versus Julius Ndongo. It's in Glasgow, Scotland. Apparently it's going to be shown on AW. I'm not familiar with the channel myself. Again, I want to caution the fans not to read too much into this fight. I'll come back to this after getting John's opinion on the bout. But again, don't play too much into the hype here with all the alphabet trinket nonsense. John, what do you think about the fight? Who do you think wins?
Well, I agree with you. I got to get my brief vent about the alphabet trinket nonsense, because when you've got when you're ranking 17 weight classes and Terrence Crawford is the champion in this division, and they're claiming that this is a unification bout, it's just ridiculous, frankly. So nothing personal against Burns or Ndongo, but I found that annoying, and fans just buying right into it. It's just frustrating if you follow the sport closely. But about the fight itself, Burns showed me against Omar Figueroa that he was a little bit better, tougher fighter than I thought he was, even though he lost. He had already fought Terrence Crawford before that and lost, but I thought he showed me some toughness against Figueroa, even though he clearly lost the fight. But he doesn't bring any pop. He's a decent fighter, but certainly nothing spectacular. And when you start talking about world champions, he could only be a quote-unquote world champion in this era. We'll say that for sure. Ndongo is basically up in the rankings when you rank 17 divisions at 140 pounds based on his shock KO over Troyanovsky for the IBF title. I had to check the odds on this one because I wanted to see how the odds makers handicapped it. They've got Burns a slight favorite. It's in Scotland, but that tells me why I did want to check that is I wanted to see how they were evaluating Ndongo's big first round KO of Troyanovsky, and frankly, those odds told me that they looked at it as he landed one punch. and so based on that, I'm going to go with Ricky Burns, and he'll probably slap his way to a 12-round decision.
Yeah, he probably will, I agree. I mean, I'm not too familiar with Julius Ndongo, so I don't believe I'm making a real informed judgment here, but I'm also going to go with Ricky Burns by decision. What Ndongo showed against Troyanovsky, it's hard to say, honestly, because I watched that fight, and it very well could have just been, it looked as if Troyanovsky might have just got caught. Maybe he's not too familiar with the southpaw position. I'm just not overly convinced by the result itself. But if we want to talk about, and let's rant a little while on this. So Ricky Burns is considered a 3-division world champion, and again, you and I both know this is a bunch of alphabet trinket baloney. I mean, I like Burns. I think he's a nice guy. I think he's worked real hard to get where he is, but unfortunately, he has never been the best in his division. He's never beaten the best guys available to him. And to label him a 3-division champion is just off the mark, in my opinion.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Again, call me old school, but I think that I would encourage even any newer fans of the sport. We know we don't have as many as we'd like, but break when you're in doubt, break it down as if there were only 8 divisions with one champ a division and see where the guy stacks up. I'm not trying to pick on Ricky Burns, but Ricky Burns is in the top 10 fighter. You use that analysis. Not only is he not a world champ, and he's not a 3-time world champ, he's not a top 10 fighter. And we're talking about title unifications. It's just absurd. Again, if you're ranking 17 divisions and Dongo's in there, hey, he did the one-punch KO over Troyanovsky. You can't take that away from him, but it's just based on that. And if you were ranking 8 divisions, he's not top 10 either. So again, just take that for food for thought and for some perspective. And then, they're just fans that don't look. And I think that's what the sport has lost somewhat. Is in the past, fans look deeper or just had the proper cynicism to know that the alphabet organizations were just crooked. They were just out for sanctioning fees, and of course they had literally been involved in all kinds of corruption trials and allegations over the years. So there's actually evidence of that. So I don't know. It just seemed like as the sport faded some in popularity, that maybe the scrutiny wasn't there. You didn't have the amount of boxing magazines you used to have, which they actually would in a good way be a lot of times the leaders in just ridiculing these organizations. You don't have the regular boxing newspaper writers who would also do the same thing, and I think that's part of the problem. There's just not a regular chorus like there used to be criticizing these organizations, calling them out for what they are, and then some fans that are just getting their news maybe off websites and things like that nowadays. They're just not even reading these kinds of criticisms.
Right, and I think with the advent of social media, you've seen a lot of talking heads who are, they're fans of certain fighters or certain kinds of fighters. I mean, I've noticed on Facebook, you have the IOTB guy, and he's just devoid of any substantive knowledge. But he's a big Mayweather fan, thus you have a lot of big Mayweather fans, and their views are kind of whimsical. If Mayweather says, oh, well, the WBC title is, number one, which I see a lot, and we've been over this too. I see that the WBC, ranks above all of them, and, lo and behold, do they forget that the WBO is older, that the Ring magazine has been doing it far longer. Again, they're just quick to forget. And with the British fans, I like them. I really think they're a great bunch. They're generally well-spoken. But my problem with them is that, they're taking this face value stuff that the promoters are dishing to them because they're labeling them world champions, and it presents a picture as if British boxing is doing, this generally fantastic job in the world today, like with Anthony Joshua and Ricky Burns and Terry Flanagan and on and on and on. Whereas if we were in an old school era where you only had 8 divisions, a lot of these guys would be fringe contenders, maybe top 10 like Kell Brook, top 5 like Kell Brook. But again, I like the British fans. They're just reading too much into this stuff. Like today, I kid you not, I saw a post on Joe Calzaghe saying that he was a world champion for 11 years, and that's one of the longest reigns in boxing history.
Well, I agree that the British, and I love the fans too. I've had the privilege of attending a lot of Lennox Lewis fights over the years when he was, of course, still active and champion, and the British fans traveled to the United States, and they were great guests, and they had a lot of fun, and they were fun to be out and drink a pint with. But with that understood, I think there's a little bit of history to it. The WBC, when they were the newer organization, and it was just WBC and WBA, they had developed a relationship with the British Board of Boxing Control. And it was a tight relationship. They did a lot of things together. And the WBC was crooked, of course, just as the WBA was, but the WBC was certainly no better. And, in fact, the IBF was still trying to go with the 15-rounder, and the WBA did for a while. And what really ended up scrapping it, of course, we know the WBC started that first at the end of 1982 when they dropped the 15-rounder. But the British Board of Boxing Control then said that they were not going to allow 15-round fights in Great Britain, and the other organizations it was really the IBF at that point, the last holdout. They were under pressure and they had to drop it. Now, you can say what you want about the safety of 15. I don't think that the WBC was really concerned about safety when they dropped the 15-rounder. I think that had to do with Don King's need for trying to fit in an hour of TV when boxing was still on regular network TV all the time. But the British do for fans of boxing, they put a ridiculous, in general, of course I'm generalizing, they seem to put a ridiculous amount of stock in alphabet organizations, and for otherwise intelligent boxing fans, I always find it a head scratcher. But then sometimes I take myself back to the history, and there was just that thing with the WBC. There was just overemphasis on some of that alphabet stuff back then. Again, when at that time, frankly, the American boxing magazines, and when we still had regular American newspaper boxing writers dedicated only to boxing, they just laughed and ridiculed the alphabet organization. So that's a split there. Now, what I question is, where did the American fans lose their cynicism for the alphabet organizations that they always had? I'm used to it from the British fans, but I don't know when some of the Americans seem to lose it.
Well, I would say that it's hard to pinpoint, but I've noticed that in this box, in the most recent era, when you had, polarizing figures like Mayweather and Pacquiao, it just seems like a lot of people pick sides, no matter how irrational it was. You had guys like, Mayweather trumpeting up his statistics, right? He's beaten this many champions, he's this time weight division, on and on and on. And I think with that, again, because he's a polarizing figure, a lot of people just fell on one side of the divide. And I just don't think there are a lot. I'm not exactly sure what happened to a lot of old school fans, to be honest with you. I know a lot of them have just kind of given up the game. I mean, I remember we were talking about this before, we even came on the air, about how some of these guys are still living in 1982. I mean, a lot of them are. I mean, a lot of historians that I know gave up boxing a long time ago. To a degree I understand, because we've talked about what the UFC is doing, right? It's just so muddied. There's just so much political nonsense that goes on. It's hard for even a guys like you and I, to follow this sport any longer. I mean, I highlighted this in one of the posts that I made. Remember, where you had Drozd, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, the cruiserweight, he was the WBC champion, okay? And then he gets stripped for inactivity. They throw some fancy label on him saying that he's champion in recess, okay? And then all of a sudden they throw Bellew's fight, they make Bellew's fight a title fight. Okay, and then Bellew moves up for one fight. I'm not quite sure, what his plans are on after that. I don't remember reading much about it. But then they strip him. And a week later, 2 weeks later, they label Bradis versus Huck title fight. So it's, you know what I mean? It's hard to follow along anymore. They did it to Jorge Linares too. I mean, Linares had a little injury. He wasn't out for that long. Well, what'd they do? They strip him. They called him a diamond champion, and then they let Zatichinin fight, almost a no-hoper for the belt. I mean, it's so damn confusing any longer that I can understand why a lot of fans have just given it up completely. I mean, this is why UFC is continuously growing, because they're marketing it well. I mean, I think the demographic that they market to is helps bring popularity to the sport as well. But I also think it's the fact that who the champion is. If I go to the UFC, I know who the champion is. I know who they're likely to get next. Cut through the political red tape.
Oh, I think that has very much to do with it, and I agree. I've been following the sport for a long time, but I like to keep following, and I agree with you. It does amaze me that I see some boxing historians that have been following the sport for a long time, but they don't follow it anymore, even though they talk about the history. They're just living in 1982, which was a golden era for boxing. I love it, love to reminisce about some of the things there, but I don't like to, stay stuck in there like a fly in ointment. I like to think back to the era and also see what's going on now. But the way I keep my boxing sanity some people might think it's too rigid, but it works for me. Is I like to take the current fighters and I like to break them down as if there were still 8 weight classes, or if you want to have a cruiserweight, make it 9. I don't think that's going to kill anything, and you can make an argument for it. But 8 to 9 weight classes, 1 champ a division. Where do people stack up? Now, you have to do some work on your own to do that, to figure out what's going on. But as you so accurately described, I'd rather do a little more work on my own and break it down myself than to follow what the WBC is going to tell me about who is a champion, who's not a champion, who's got a diamond belt, who's got an interim belt. It's actually laughable. And what I always advocate is whenever anybody's in doubt about the WBC, go on YouTube if you're younger and watch it, how they tried to take the heavyweight title away from Buster Douglas the morning after he knocked out Mike Tyson, until the fans literally shouted them down and they had to back off from their ridiculous scheme, which was all just orchestrated. And this nonsensical idea of a long count was all just orchestrated because Don King was so confident Mike Tyson was going to knock out Buster Douglas that he did not have a rematch clause. And then the Duvas and main events came in and gave Buster Douglas $25 million to fight Evander Holyfield, and took all the belts and the linear title away from Don King, who had controlled it up to that point. So that's what that was all about. That's your WBC. So that's their contribution to boxing history.
Right, and to another point, not only do we see this constant corruption within these alphabet soup organizations, but I think your organization, call it rigid if you will. I mean, there was a day when it was the norm. Is that it cuts through all the nonsense and it gets down to the heart of the issue. This is why I like transnational boxing rankings, because they don't honor the titles. It's merit based. Okay, so you get ranked based on what you've done. I just wish they would go a step farther like you do, and for anybody who's interested in this, you can check out John's articles on the website. The featherweight division will be soon, but I wish they would go a step further and just rank on the traditional 8. And that's what I wish the Ring magazine would do as well, because there was a time when that's what they would do, but I just think, I don't know what happened, but they finally got sucked into the whole thing. And now this is just the way it is. But one thing I want to point out too is, aside from the corruption, aside from the fact that there are too many weight divisions, right? 105, 108, 112. Do we really need that? One thing that I've emphasized in my years of boxing is what we've missed out because of these added weight divisions. Now, I use Ricardo Lopez because I know you agree with me here. Ricardo Lopez was a fantastic fighter. I mean, I really like his style. Technically, he was just about flawless. He could do just about anything in the ring, but he languished for years at 105, minimum weight, strawweight, whatever you want to call it, fighting a bunch of no-hopers, a bunch of guys, a lot of guys that none of us have ever heard of, none of which who will ever get into the Hall of Fame. And then he moves up to 108. Well, this is the unfortunate part, in my opinion, is that, so while he's at 105, who do we have at 108? We have Michael Carbajal and Chiquito Gonzalez. Who do we have at 112? We have Yuri Arbachakov, and for a few years we have Mark Too Sharp Johnson. Now, imagine these divisions don't exist. Imagine there's no 105. Imagine there's no 108. Now we have a golden era of flyweights. We have Mark Too Sharp Johnson, Yuri Arbachakov, Gonzalez, Carbajal, and Lopez. Okay, so now imagine you can apply this in so many different eras. Okay, what about Kostya Tszyu? Imagine 140 doesn't exist. Okay, so he's competing with Shane Mosley, Tito Trinidad, Vernon Forrest, and on and on and on. Yeah, De La Hoya, of course. I mean, those were 2 big missed fights, right? If Mosley would have had a stopover from 135 to 140 and fought Kostya Tszyu, it would have really helped Mosley's and Tszyu's resumes. Okay, but Mosley skipped 140 to get the big money with De La Hoya. De La Hoya and Tszyu just it didn't work out. But unfortunately, what do we get? Kostya Tszyu, who's a damn good fighter, he stays at 140, beating up a bunch of guys who are good fighters, but not on the level of Trinidad, Forrest, Mosley, on and on and on. I mean, you can apply this in so many different eras. Well, I mean the modern era, but you can apply this in so many different ways. And I wish people would look at it in that way too. Think of the fights that we've missed because of this.
They really have to start looking at it that way for there to be any hope of boxing. I mean, if the fans stop buying into this stuff, that's the only chance it'll get better. I agree with you. You know, I look at transnationals ratings and the Ring's ratings, and when Nigel Collins was the editor of the Ring a couple decades ago, he did try to go back to the original 8 for a little while, but they didn't stick with it. But I wish they would have stayed with it longer. They didn't stay with it very long, and I think maybe if they stayed with it longer, it would have been effective. But why? This is where I think there is some fan laziness. It would be so easy for some fans, especially now with the web, to just get on Transnational's website. You know, get on the Ring's website. You know, look at the Grueling Truth and see the articles that we're writing, and just look at things that way instead of just you know seeing some announcement from the WBC or the WBO or the IBF and taking that like it's meaningful, because when you really break it down, it's not. If you just want to maybe understand why some fight might be happening in the rare occasion, it's actually more rare than people think when they're actually able to force a good fight.
Imagine if you had Riggin. Imagine if you had Riggin at 126, right? And he didn't have all the WBO, WBA, WBC garbage, right? There's a contemporary example of a big fight that could have been made. I mean, we just see this time and time again, and it's just tiresome. Okay, well, Al Heyman won't play ball with Bob Arum. Bob Arum won't play ball with this guy. Well, the WBO doesn't rate these fighters. The WBC doesn't rate these fighters. I'm not sure why people buy into this, but it gives people a convenient excuse not to fight. And I don't understand why the fans latch onto this, because if you're a fan, I think if you're a good fan, you want to see the best fight the best. Again, this is why the UFC is so popular. The best fight the best. So cut through the tape and let's start to get shit done. I mean, that's part of the reason why I follow modern boxing. I mean, I'm a part of the International Boxing Research Organization, whatever. I love my historical stuff. I write on historical guys too, but I want to see the game change. I want to see the modern game change so we can get back to those old days and start enjoying the fights, because even though participation levels are down, I would say at least in the United States, we have a lot of interesting guys coming through the ranks. It's very interesting to see, guys from former USSR nations flooding into the professional ranks. It's nice to see some of the Cuban guys finally get a shot. I like the state of boxing in that sense, but I don't like where it's gone. And so, rant finished. We're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna talk about some news. So I want to know, John, what would you like to talk about? What's been piquing your interest lately?
Really, the article, just tying in right with what we were saying, and I just, as we move on, I just got to add too. Remember, the UFC is only ranking 8 weight classes, so that adds a lot.
They have the right idea.
But and we can seg into the fact that even Dana White of the UFC complimented on Al Heyman on what he was trying to do with the PBC. Because I think that was originally what Al Heyman was trying to do. He backed off of it. I think he was trying to create a UFC for boxing. I don't have any doubt or problem with that. Some people did. I like the fighters to make as much money as possible. It seemed like Heyman has always treated his fighters well, so I felt comfortable with what he was trying to do there. But why that matters to me is there's news this week that seems to be kind of the first news out there, not just put out by detractors, but just factual, that PBC having some trouble, not about their finances per se, but Spike, the only TV network that was actually paying rights fees to the PBC to show the fights, they're not going to do that anymore. Of course, there could be some other things going on there because they're under the same ownership as Showtime and CBS, and we know Showtime and CBS combined are showing plenty of PBC. So maybe there could be something there. But just the fact that Spike was the only ones paying rights fees, and they're not going to do that anymore. There was talk in some of the same articles from credible sources. I know Dan Raphael at ESPN had reported some of it, and Tim Smith from PBC was quoted in there. So you've got actually discussions with PBC representatives that it looked like ESPN was not going to have any more regular PBC fights, and it looked like NBC was also out. FS1 was still good to go. You and I have discussed off air that we have liked a lot of the FS1 PBC shows. We think they're kind of underrated, so that's good news. They're still going to go onward, and we know there's a lot of Showtime stuff going on. Tim Smith did also comment that there was possibilities of maybe there would be some single fight deals or fight deals for some bigger fights with some of these networks still, which might be the truth, because we've heard the PBC's demise talked about before, and then they've bounced back up and continued onward. So I'm going to hope for that. But as a boxing fan, for all the reasons we were talking about, I had some hope, and I did admire what Heyman was trying to do, what Al Heyman was trying to do when he got started out, for the same reasons Dana White said. Everybody else says, they criticize Heyman for this or that, but none of them did it, and they could have tried to. In other words, Bob Arum never did it, Oscar De La Hoya, nobody else ever did it, and Al Heyman was trying to do it at least. So he made the effort, he put himself out on the line, but I thought that the news this week wasn't too good.
No, I don't know either, but I'm not going to, I'm not going to proclaim like a lot of guys that it's a sinking ship just yet. I think they're putting out enough content on enough channels, where they can do without Spike at the moment. But hopefully Heyman is just kind of shoring it all together, and, eventually we'll get back there. I know, I've read that Spike plans on showing more MMA cards. That may be the case. I'm not quite sure where the direction is there. But again, I'm not going to declare PBC a sinking ship. And what I think is that Al brought some innovation to, so what you see in the United States of America and a lot of Western European countries because of the markets, I mean, it's just a golden age of innovation. And unfortunately, we don't get that a lot in boxing. It's antiquated. A lot of things in the sport just happen slowly. And not only that, you include the corruption and politics and whatnot. It's almost like trying to pass a bill through Congress or the House. I mean, it takes a long time. There are a lot of ways to stop it. And I think that's what Heyman is experiencing now. He's experiencing the politics, and he realized that he can't just bulldoze guys that have been, promoting in the business for many, many years. But I think Heyman I think he's got some vision, and that I think we all have to respect, because if his goal, like you and I have talked about, is to get a sort of UFC thing going in boxing, I think this is something that we should all get behind. I'm not quite sure why there's been so much backlash about Heyman. I've heard some, questions about his ethics and whatnot, and some of his character flaws, as if we all don't have them. But I think he's sort of trying to add innovation to the boxing market, and it's not something we see often. But what I like about it is that because he's doing these sort of things, Oscar De La Hoya, Bob Arum, and others, they almost have to stand up and take some notice, right? I mean, when they start to see a piece of their pie taken away from them, they have to understand why, or at least they have to try to understand why. And if they don't, well, then they can just sit there with their old models and hopefully get left behind. So eventually, I'm hoping that, whether it's Heyman, whether it's somebody else, I wouldn't mind seeing Richard Schaefer. Richard Schaefer seems like a guy who has a little vision as well. I know he just got back into the boxing industry. I'm hoping one day one of these guys will finally get it together, and then they'll pull together, and we'll finally have an organization, a centralized organization or a decentralized organization, whatever, so long as it works. Just so long as we get the best fighting the best. Hopefully it'll work out. Again, it's kind of tough to say. Boxing's an up and down sport, a lot of ebbs and flows. But yeah, I hope we finally get some forward thinking, and we see it a little bit. We did criticize the WBC a little bit, but I like their drug policy. At least that started to creep into boxing. But again, I don't want to make too much about this. But is there anything else you'd like to talk about, John?
Well, I agree. I really just don't care for the WBC, but I reluctantly agree that the drug programs, and I would go back throughout their history. I think it's really the only good thing I've ever seen them do, but I don't have a problem with that. I think that's been good. But one good thing after all these years is not enough. So I wouldn't be fooled by that. But I like what Al Heyman has tried to do. Somebody had to try to do something. I'm going to say something positive. Having followed the sport for a long time, and for anybody that wants to get some feel of some of these past glory days, which truly were some glory days. When Al Heyman started putting some of these cards on, I mean, it gives me more of that feel, because a lot of these cards on FS1, even with lesser-known guys, there were competitive matchups, a lot of good action, a lot of surprisingly good fights. He had some on Saturday afternoons there. A lot of good feelings for me. It made me even at this stage more enthusiastic about the sport, and I think he made an excellent point, which I totally agree with. I think what we got after 2 years of PBC is that there was more pressure on Top Rank and Golden Boy to deliver more, and maybe we haven't seen the full results of that yet, but we saw some, and Al Heyman was able to get some of his guys who weren't even his best guys in most cases, except for maybe Danny Jacobs. He was able to get them some big paydays by crossing them over with guys on HBO. So he's done well for his fighters, both with the PBC and even when he's crossed them over. So I hope it can keep going. I think you made another good point. I hope that I think there are a lot of indications Al Heyman's a good business guy, and hopefully he's just pulling back and regrouping. I did neglect to mention they will also stay on Bounce TV, which some Bounce doesn't have a far reach, but some of those cards have been surprisingly highly rated. So I can't completely discount those either. They will still be going, as well as the FS1 cards, and there have been rumors of some of these fights. I know they were talking about Stevenson and Monahan, and now maybe Stevenson and Fonfara might be on Fox. So I know that they've got something working where there might be a regular Fox card coming out.
Yeah, and I just want to add real quickly that one thing we should point out is that Al Heyman is helping to kill the pay-per-view model, and I think that's a good thing for all of us. It's, you know what I mean? I think we're all tired, especially, again, Bob Arum, we're pointing the finger at you. You put on a bunch of mismatches. You have one international star there, and it constantly charging us. Well, when I watch Keith Thurman versus Danny Garcia, when I watch Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter, when you do stuff like that, you make it hard to get me to pay for Pacquiao versus Vargas or Pacquiao versus Horn or whatever it may be. So kudos to Al Heyman in that regard too.
Yeah, he did a great job there, and I do have something else I'd like to vent about that's directly along those lines. I think where fans in this era really hurt themselves just because of what you said about paying for pay-per-views that are not worth it, although that's finally dropped, but is the fact that a quote-unquote stacked undercard is not a guy and two other guys not fighting each other, but fighting guys who are just going to fall down, who are complete no-hopers. That is not a stacked undercard. A stacked undercard is evenly matched fights with people you want to see, of which each guy has a legitimate chance to win. That's a stacked undercard.
What a weird concept.
I don't see how fans keep buying into this when we get three names against three no-hopers, and that's pay-per-view, and they're saying it's a stacked card. That is not a stacked card.
And then they complain afterwards.
Yeah, it's just that you just can't pay $70 for that, and I agree with what you said. Again, Al Heyman's helping with that. I think boxing's heard a little bit that Showtime's subscriber base isn't as high as HBO, and the PBC stuff's going to Showtime, but Showtime has done a great job with their boxing program in recent years, and I'd much rather have the stuff on Showtime than pay-per-view. I like what Al Heyman's done when he's put some of these big fights on CBS. Let's hope somehow if PBC is going to keep going, they can keep doing some more of that. I'd really like to have him get one night where he's got something like a Porter and Thurman, and then he's got enough time to have a couple of really good fights that have a good chance of being barn burners on the undercard. Just get a good night of boxing, a great night of boxing when anybody just flipping the channels can tune in if they're a casual fan. That's something that's going to attract them or some younger viewer. Maybe we'll still get that. We're going to have to see how it plays out. But we've got, I guess, Berto and Porter on Showtime next week. I don't think that's going to be one of their better ones. I don't think that Berto's got too much of a shot there. But we've seen worse fights than that, of course.
Yeah, like Mayweather Berto. But I don't think there's going to be much from that too. Again, it seems to be from Mayweather fans, and I don't want to harp on them, even though a lot of them are, we know how they are. But the thing about Berto is he's like Chavez Jr. in the sense that he hasn't beaten a top-ranked contender in a long time. Yeah, he had a nice performance against Ortiz, in which he was getting outboxed the whole damn time, and then
he got dropped.
A nice punch.
He got dropped.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but we already knew what we were getting in Ortiz. I mean, it was a good matchup, but does beating Victor Ortiz really improve your standing in the welterweight division? No, certainly not. So I expect Porter to go out there and get him. I'm sure you do too, but I don't see a whole lot in the news that I'm interested in myself. So we are going to wrap up the show. I want to encourage everybody to continuously check out the website. There's an article of mine that was posted today, the top 10 defensive fighters in boxing. We've had Mikey Garcia on the show recently. We will have again Aegis Kovialauskas on soon. We've had Cornelius Bunridge. We've had Lamont Peterson, Rasheed Warren, on and on and on. We've got a good staff of writers at the moment, and I encourage everybody to go and check those pieces out. Again, John's newest article will be up fairly soon. I also want to encourage everybody to check out all of our podcasts, whether it's football, boxing, MMA, on and on and on. It's on iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, basically anywhere you can find a podcast. Again, I encourage everybody to go and check that out. So for thegruelingtruth.net, I am Jeremiah J. Preisser, and this is John Einrienhofer. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I had a great time, and look forward to doing it again sometime.